Good afternoon, folks. This is going to be part 2 in our series on gardening like your life depends on it. I am starting seeds today for our soil garden in our 4 30-foot beds, and wanted to discuss a few different topics with you today. I'm going to briefly mention the seeds that we're planting. I want to talk to you about how to determine how many seedlings you need and the different types of spacing that you'll see in your garden. There's a fair bit to this, so please bear with me. Let's get started with rows and spacing right off the bat. All right, the 2 documents that I'm going to use today and be referring to are the garden planning detail sheet and the sample garden plan. I mentioned these in the previous video and had the link to the Facebook group where you can find these. If you don't have them, I'll put the link in the description for you again today. Go to Facebook, join the group, go into the file section and find the sample garden plan and the garden planning detail sheet. Let's get started. I'm going to talk about a subject today that confuses some people, and that is alternating rows when it comes to planting or transplanting your seedlings into the garden. If you look at your garden planning detail sheet, you pick a variety of plant. It will tell you the spacing between the plants. It will tell you the number of rows and whether it is a full row or an alternating row. And this is important to know so that you can determine how many seedlings you need to fill any given space. If you look at your sample garden plan and all of the vegetables that are laid out there for you, you're going to be planting them in typically a quarter of a bed or an eighth of a bed. Each plant, depending on the spacing, the number of rows, and how much of that bed you need to plant is going to dictate how many seedlings of each variety you need. And we're going to cover that today so that you understand how many seedlings you need to start. The 2 boards that I have laid out here are the row, the soil bed where you're going to be doing all your gardening. This rooster is not going to give me a break. We have single rows, which are pretty self-explanatory. In your soil bed, you're going to have a single row along one edge of that bed. It's pretty simple to figure out. Yes, Mr. Rooster. Tomatoes are an example. They're planted 9 inches apart in a single row. If you have a known number of feet that you need to plant in your garden, and I'm going to use the sample garden plan as an example, we're going to plant a quarter row of tomatoes. A quarter row is 7.5 feet. 7.5 feet times 12 for the number of inches in a foot gives us 90 inches. Tomatoes are planted 9 inches apart. Divide 90 by 9 and you come up with 10. Now if you look at the sample garden plan, it's going to say 11. The reason that there is 11, you're going to plant the first tomato at 0 inches. You'll have 9 inches between each plant. So for tomatoes in your sample garden plan with a 30-foot bed, you're going to need 11 tomatoes in your garden. Anything that is 2 rows, whatever the spacing is, those plants will be planted directly across from one another, just like that. Now, the confusion comes in when it says 2 alternating rows. And examples of 2 alternating rows are going to be for your broccoli. Broccoli is planted 2 rows, 14 inches of space, but the rows are alternating. Let's assume that each one of these boards is 7 inches wide. So here to here is 14 inches. The first broccoli plant in the first row is going to be planted at 0 inches. The second one at 14. To get the alternating row, our second row here, we're going to plant the first one at 7 inches. And then the second one at 21. And you get a zigzag pattern. This is done because these plants will get so large in diameter that they'll start to compete for light if they're planted directly across from one another. By staggering them, that gives them plenty of room to grow and to get the light that they need. So single row, like that, double row, like that, and our alternating row is like that. If you have any questions, you don't understand this, let me know. Now, another question that I often see is how do I determine how much of each seedling I'm going to need for my garden? If you were sowing your seeds directly in the garden, it wouldn't be important. But we want to start all of our seedlings here, get them big, healthy, and strong, and then transplant them into the garden. I discussed this in another video. If you're wanting to learn more about it, I will put a link in the description box for you. You can go and hear me talk about why we do it this way. Because we're starting seedlings, we need to know how many seedlings we're going to need for any given space in our garden. If you're like me, you're going to need a calculator, pen and pencil, or pen and paper, and a little bit of thought. Let me walk you through an example off of the sample garden plan. Again, we're working off of the late spring and summer garden column, and the example we're going to use today is onions. The sample garden plan calls for a quarter row of onions. When we go to our garden planning detail sheet for onions, for a bulb that we're going to grow, we see that we have a 4-inch spacing, and the onions are grown in 4 rows. Now, to figure out how many onions we're going to need, and yes, I start onions in my seedling trays and transplant them into the garden. We need to know how much space we're going to occupy. We need to know the spacing and the number of rows that we plant them at. We know that we're going to do a quarter of a row. A row is 30 feet. 1/4 of 30 feet is 7.5 feet. If you take 7.5 for the number of feet, multiply it by 12 for the number of inches in each foot. My cheat sheet's blowing away. There we go. We come up with 90 inches. We have 90 inches in which we're going to plant onions. With our spacing at 4 inches, divide 90 by 4, and we come up with 22.5. So in each row of our onions that are going into our garden, we're going to have 22.5, you can round up, round down, either way, 22.5 onions. We know that we have 4 rows. So you take your 22.5, multiply it by 4, and you end up with a grand total of 90 onions that we're going to need. Unfortunately, every seed that we put in the soil is not going to germinate. I figure in everything that I do, an average germination rate of 85%. So if 85% of the 90 seeds, onion seeds, that I put in one of these trays germinate, I'm going to end up with 76.5 seeds that germinate into onion. It's a little bit short of what we actually need by 13.5. So if you add the 13.5 to that, you get 103.5. So 104. I would need 104 onion seeds in here to fill my 7.5 feet, or my quarter of a row of soil bed. I also calculate into these numbers 1 in 10 of each of those seedlings is going to be a runt. It's not going to be strong, it's not going to be healthy, it's not going to grow well. I don't want to put the runts in the garden, so I add another 10% to that number to make sure when I'm done that I will have 90 strong and healthy seedlings that I can transplant out into the garden. So I would add 9 more, 10% of 90 is 9, to my 104, and I would end up with 113 onion seeds that I would need to start to ensure that I had 90 healthy seedlings to put in the garden. I have made a couple of changes to the sample garden plan. I already have cabbage started, and it's going to be in my greenhouse. I'm not going to put additional cabbage out into my soil. I'm going to grow something different in its place. I also have found that our family does not eat chard, so I am replacing chard with Brussels sprouts. I am not a big Brussels sprout fan. The leaves on the Brussels sprout plant are edible. They are considered a secondary edible, and they are quite good. I enjoy them. I am also going to do okra, and all of our beans are going to be a pole variety. We're going to grow them under our vertical structure. Beyond that, all the varieties listed on that sheet is what I'm starting here today. From our sample garden plan and the list of everything that we're going to start, the only thing that I am not going to start as a seedling and transplant into the garden are going to be the carrots and a parsnip. I do have another video where I show you an easier way to do it. It doesn't require transplanting, and it makes dealing with those tiny seeds much easier. Put an iCard here for you and put a link to the video in the description. When I am done with these, they're going to go out in the greenhouse. I know a lot of you do not have the benefit of a greenhouse or even grow lights with which to start your seedlings under. I've built something with materials that I had on hand. It is inexpensive, but it's going to be effective at utilizing the sun to get your seeds to germinate. I will be showing you that in the next video or two, and I think that you will like it. It's simple and inexpensive to make, but it'll make a big difference in your germination for all of your seeds. I had somebody ask me about using the garden planning detail sheet today, and I'm going to try and do a video on it from the computer and explain what these different columns mean. Knowing how to use this is going to make you a better gardener. If you have any questions about what we've done here today or anything else relating to the Mittleider garden, please let me know. If you have not already joined the Facebook group, use the link in the description box to get to the correct group. And I'll see you there. Thank you for watching, and happy gardening.